All right, it's From the West Barn with Joe West
and Mike Shimshack.
Today, our illustrious guest is Mr. Jimmy Wayne.
Who come up with this track, man?
It's hot.
It's hot. It's fire, right?
You did that Shimshack.
I did, man.
We know
it's my best Quincy Jones.
We know a couple record producers that put it together.
Man, that is good, man.
Thank you.
Almighty.
Essentially, it was downloaded off of Splice in its entirety.
Not entirely true. Different.
It's actually great. He sent it to me. You know, as a producer, you get things.
I'm still dancing, man. I'm like, that thing's good.
And the first time I heard it, I'm like, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's good, man.
Yeah.
So a little bit about our guest here, Jimmy Wayne. He's so many things. He's a true Renaissance man. He's recreated himself a million times, but I don't really even think that he's recreated himself. He's just done sort of whatever creatively was within his reach and what he felt like he wanted to do at the time. He's been a hit songwriter. Started off his career as a hit songwriter when he came to town, and then became an artist and had many hits, a bunch of top tens, 4 or 5 top tens, number one. And then went on from there to be a New York Times best-selling author, right?
Mm-hmm.
3-time best-selling author. So what a life. I love that about you, and I aspire to do that. You know, it's like people say, oh, man, it's so cool the way you recreated yourself. I'll get people saying that. And for me, you tell me what you think about this. For me, it's the same as songwriting is making a film or writing a book or anything that you do creatively. It's the same muscle.
That's right.
So it's not like it's not like you abandoned the one. The next day you may be a songwriter again. But I've always loved that. And why don't you tell us a little bit about, you know, Jimmy came to town in 2000?
98.
In 98?
Yep.
Got a publishing deal?
Yep. Well, it happened in my hometown back in North Carolina.
Yeah, where are you from? What's your background?
West of Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay.
So I entered a contest, one of those. I thought it was a gimmick, and I was like,
like a talent contest?
Yeah, my girlfriend at the time said, you need to go to this event. And I was like, man, I've done so many of those, and they always ask for money. And I'm like, I'm not going. She's like, you've got to go to this one. And I don't know why, I went. You know, I wrote about it in the book, Walk the Beautiful, but it tells it in detail. But I went, and that was the one.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the one.
Did you grow up singing in church or anything like that?
I just love music. All kinds of music. I grew up in a foster care system, so I was exposed to wide range of music styles. And
you started off in a metal band, right?
Rock, heavy metal, rap, you know.
Totally self-taught.
Everything, just, you know, soul music. So I was exposed to all of that. My mom listened to rock and gospel, and then the group home kids would listen to rap and heavy metal, and
yeah.
So anyway, I just had some experience, you know, with all that music, and sort of found what I like to do when I heard soul music. And I loved soul, but I liked country lyrics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And it was a guy named Alan Jackson, and I heard some of his lyrics, and I was like, man, I really like country lyrics. But I like soul music. Anyway, I went to this contest, and I sang one line of a song, and they were like, stop. and then they said, put your cassette tape in. I put this cassette tape in, press play. I mean, they were very stoic, elderly men. And I pressed play and started trying to sing the first line of the song. They said, stop. Have a good day. And that was it. That was the
You didn't win?
No.
I thought you won that.
No, I was number 300, and I was the very last person in the room.
How many people were there?
300 people. It was like, and then I didn't get the gig. It was a gig for the Opryland theme park.
Okay.
It's an audition for that gig, and man, I'll never forget it. I went home, and I was just so mad because they had talked me into dancing. And I'm not a freaking dancer, man. I'm just not. I had a little breakdancing group when I was 12, but I knew like one move.
Right.
And then when the other 4 or 5 guys know a different move, you look like a group. You can do like throw it off. And they had me dancing, and I was like, I wore this ridiculous bolo that I didn't know you were supposed to stop here. I pulled it all the way up. This saddle was sticking in my neck, and it was just horrible. But the guy that was one of the judges was sitting there, and he called me and invited me to move to Nashville. Gave me a job at Opryland. It was Acuff Rose Music Publishing Company, but they had renamed it to Opryland. I couldn't believe it. I literally felt like I had won the lottery. I mean, that's what it felt like, because I was living in a trailer. I was working a job at a prison. You know, I was an officer at a prison. And going from that to, I mean, my rent was $40 a week.
Wow.
I couldn't, you know, small town America, man. Brandywine Circle, I'll never forget it. And I just, I got the cops calling on me one time because I was practicing, you know, so late at night. I was always working. And, man, when I got that phone call, here's the cool thing about it is I actually still have that phone call on a
Oh, that's crazy.
voice recorder. Because, you know, you hear people say, when did you get that call? Did you get that call? I'm like, I have that call on my answer machine.
Wow.
I still have it, yeah. That's a jewel, you know.
And that was Mike Whalen.
Mike Whalen, yep. He called me and he says, hey, Jimmy, you know, whatever. This is Mike Whalen from, and I was like, he's like, we'd like to talk to you about coming to Nashville. I was like,
So that's crazy. If you were like number 300, what was it about you that made him call you?
I was probably, I don't know. I mean,
I saw something.
Well, the thing about it is I practiced and I worked really hard with my singing. I mean, I didn't like wake up one day and say I'm a singer. I took lessons. I paid for them. I'd go cut grass, and then I'd take that money and go to a vocal coach. Her name was Becky Hyde Smith, and she changed my life because she taught me about, you know, voice control and annotation, diction, and you know, speech level singing.
Wow.
And what people don't know about you may not know about you is that you're raised in the foster care system, had a turbulent life, so you really put value on things.
Well, I mean, yeah, because
it meant something to you
Absolutely.
to earn it, or to go when you wanted something, you had to go get it.
Go work
It was
for
never
it.
given.
Yeah, that's
for
where
it.
your work ethic came from.
That's where it came from, and you know, I'd been working since I was a kid. You know, 10 years old, 9 years old, and so it was not hard, if you will, for me to go and work. I wasn't afraid of work. So I just really invest a lot of time into working and reading about vocal, you know, and how to take care of it, and, you know, drink a big cup of coffee. No, everything, you know, I went to this contest, and I guess it's that. I didn't even know the lyrics of the song. I got so nervous, I'd forgotten the lyrics of the song. So, I mean, I didn't even sing the last song. I made up something, and it was like, I don't know the lyrics of the song, and I was like, it was just horrible. And they started kind of laughing.
And I think that's another interesting point is, like, there is a certain amount of purpose that is in everyone's life. Like, your story has been told a little bit beyond you. It's like there's a reason you were supposed to come to Nashville, and it's probably unlikely that you were one of the people that. How many people did Mike reach out to?
That was it.
You.
I was the only one.
So it was like, even despite your poor performance, it was still like you were supposed to be in Nashville. It's eventually part of your story. I love the other thing that you're one of my favorite acoustic guitar players. And I was lucky enough to make a record with Jimmy in 2007-ish. And it blew me away. And I was new to Nashville, so I wasn't the normal record producer in Nashville, the way they do their sessions. And I was blown away that no one had asked you, being as cool of a guitar player and how connected it was to your vocal, the way you play. It's kind of like John Denver or James Taylor. Like, I can't imagine those guys singing with someone else playing guitar. And I felt that way about you, but it blew me away that you told me that when you moved to Nashville, you were unable to play the guitar and sing.
Well, excuse me. I actually had taken some guitar lessons, just a couple of guitar lessons in my hometown. There was a guy that, I won't mention his name, but he used to give me some guitar lessons, and they were so sophisticated you couldn't you couldn't
apply them.
Couldn't apply them. I mean, there's like stuff I just couldn't. I could play that one song and that was it. But then sometimes I'd show up and he'd have a gun, sawed-off shotgun, and he'd say, "Read that scripture to me," and I'd read scripture, and he'd hold this gun, and so I got kind of like real nervous about taking guitar lessons. So I was like, I'm not going back to this guy. This guy's crazy.
Guaranteed that you would practice in the off time.
I was like,
what I tell you about practice?
It's kind of next level guitar teaching.
Well, it just I took a couple lessons, and then it really when I got to Nashville, I drove in and parked on Chet Atkins' place near the old NSAI, yeah, and between 18th and 17th Avenue, there's a brick wall still there, and they were building the gray building that became Word.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was sitting behind it, and I was like, wow, man, I have no clue. I mean, what I'm doing. I just didn't know. I mean, the guy said move to town, and anyway, I just saw everyone carrying guitars, going in and out of rooms and buildings and doors, and I'm like, man, everybody plays guitar here. I've got to learn how to play. So I started practicing, and I'm not talking about like sitting down 2 or 3 hours practicing. I spent my life practicing. For 3 years, I practiced from the moment I woke up. I slept with a guitar in the bed, and I would practice until I went to bed that night. I mean, it was just so much practicing. Where and there was a songwriter in town named her name is Sarah Majors, and she told me, she said, you need to go and take lessons from this lady. Her name's Ellen Britton, and she's a guitar instructor from Philadelphia. And I was like, all right. And I pulled into her driveway, and I sat in the car for 15 minutes of the 30-minute guitar lesson. And she finally came to the front door, and she said, get your blankety blank in here. And I was like, I like her, man. She's just really pretty tough. So I went in and I sat down, and she said, we're going to start with this bass line. And she was very sort of elementary style of teaching, but you know, not everyone can be a great teacher. You know, you may know a lot, and but being patient and being able to teach is a skill of its own, and that's exactly what Ellen Britton did. She said, practice slow and you'll learn faster. And I did. And so everything was dong, 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 and it was just that. If you get fast, you'll mess up, and it takes you 7 times to unlearn that mistake. So, and that's what she kept telling me over and over. You've got to do it 7 times correctly before you can erase that mistake out of your mind. But just the way she taught was just, and I learned. I mean, I learned the basics, and then I found a thumb pick in the floor of the old Opryland Music Group Publishing Company, the folks that signed me. And it belonged to Skip Ewing. And I thought, man, I'm going to learn how to play like Skip, because he uses that thumb pick. I'm going to use it. And then you
eventually wrote a song with him that was top 10.
Yep, went to number 9, I think.
For Tracy Byrd.
Put
your hand in mine.
That's a freaky story, man. I mean, that's a freak story. Like, backing up before I moved to Nashville, probably in '94. Maybe even 92. Anyway, I was sitting in the floor at B. Her name is B. Was my foster parent. And I was sitting in the floor watching TV. It was a floor model wooden TV that was huge, and I got it out of some junk pile somewhere or whatever. But I was watching the Crook and Chase show, and there was this guy singing and playing, but he was playing other people's music. I thought, why is this guy playing other people's music? Because I didn't know that there were writers wrote songs for artists. I didn't know anything about the music business. And he just played, and I thought, man, I learned that he had written those songs. And I was like, what would it be like to write a song with that guy? I mean, he's really amazing. And the day I got signed to Opryland Music Publishing Company, I was standing in the hallway on the 3rd floor, and I saw someone walk through a back door, and I looked, and that was that guy. Walked in, and he walked down the hall, and I stopped him, and I was like, "You're that guy I saw on the Crook and Chase show." I was like years ago, like 4 years ago, and I just couldn't believe it because he was bigger than life.
Didn't your publisher say, "Hey, don't"?
Oh yeah, they
don't talk to him.
Well, they said, stay out of his way. He's the guy that's paying the.
He's the golden goose. Yeah, don't mess with him.
He's paying the light bill here. Don't get in his way. But in my mind, the way I think is, well, if he's the golden goose, or if he's the man, well, that's who I want to know. I mean, I want to learn. I want to be around him, not the guy that's not writing hit songs. And that's just business. I mean, that's just the way it is. You don't go cut a yard that's already been cut. You go look for the yard that has weeds and grass growing. You're like, I need to cut that grass because that's where I'm going to get paid. And so it was like a year into this. I'd see him walking around, and one day I'm jumping all over the place, guys. But I saw him, and I was like, man, I got a song idea you got to hear. And he was in the middle of a writing session, and he said, okay, come in here. Long story short, I went to his writing room, and I shared this idea with him, and he said, man, that's strong as a new piece of rope. I'll never forget him saying that. And he shut the door, and he started playing the piano, and we had just started writing a song. And then we reconvened and finished the song, and it was unbelievable.
And what did that feel like once that song became a hit or it was on the radio?
Well, I didn't know that it had even been. No, I knew it had been recorded, but in part of my mind, it was probably like you and Dave kind of felt when I used to tell y'all songs on the radio. It just didn't feel real until you really heard it. And so someone told me, they said, Tracy Byrd recorded your song, and I was like, God, that's just it's beyond. I mean, I've only been in town a year. I was just living in a trailer a year ago, and it just didn't seem real to me. And then I was backing into a gym. It's called Armo's Gym. There was a strip club beside it, so you could work out, and then the girls would come in and
then go work out.
Yeah, the girls would come over there, and some of the guys would work out with them. And it was a freak show there, man. That was a crazy place. They would, man. They'd come over, and those guys would be benching, and next thing you know, they'd be benching. It was crazy. See all that stuff in Nashville.
Where's this gym?
It's no longer there. People are eating sandwiches there now. It's a restaurant.
So what was the cult? You guys were both here in 2007, right?
Yeah.
What was the culture like in Nashville? Because
I can tell you right now, when I got here, it was starched jeans, cowboy hats.
There's still big hats and
flannel shirts.
Those rodeo-looking shirts.
Everything was rodeo, and
I can remember being on a boat with my publisher, and they were talking about Taylor Swift because she had just come on the scene, and I'm from New York City, and I was in the pop world, so like I had seen like Britney Spears and Mandy Moore and all, just the way that happened, and they were all talking about Taylor Swift like she was, we'll get through this. We're gonna go back to the normal. And I was too young to speak up, but I thought in my head, I thought, this is changing. Everything that you know is not gonna be the way you know it.
Oh yeah, I remember that too.
And you'd go around, you'd be people writing 3 times a day, 5 days a week. You don't get that anymore. You don't have the NSAI says that we've lost 80% of the songwriters, and it's actually true. Of the old culture, show up, get paid, publishing draw, and go right in one of those houses. So we don't have that anymore. But now there's no one. We were just talking about this the other day. There's no one left to tell the story. It's like it's kind of gone away.
I came to Nashville on the tail end of that era. I was here in '98 when Dean Dillon was still writing for Acuff Rose, Whitey Schaefer, Donnie Keys, Skip Ewan, those folks, man. I mean, they were writing all those George Strait songs and just legends.
Yeah.
And so it was like seeing those guys walk the hallways was literally like looking at, just history. You're looking at them like, gosh, you wrote songs that literally changed lives and has. All my exes live in Texas. Everybody knows that song.
The copyrights.
And you see this guy walking down the hallway, and you're like, you wrote that song. Or then you'd go over here to the Longhorn, and you'd see the guy that wrote the theme song to Love Boat, or guy sitting at the bar wrote, you know, whatever. You know, I remember sitting in a room with a guy from New York, and he said they had a writing appointment because they just hook you up with somebody to write. Write with this guy that they show up, and you show up, and you might have an idea, he might have an idea, you might have a music idea, he has a song idea, and we just collaborate. But I was kind of, it was my first song, had Put Your Hand in Mine was the first song I had written and had been recorded, although I didn't, you know, when I think about writing a song, I think about actually contributing to writing the song. That wasn't the case with the first song I wrote. It was, I had the idea. But when I sat down with Skip, I mean, he truly was just one of those kind of writers that you can't believe how good he is. And he just wrote the song. He just said, you write the song down. I'll tell you what to write. I mean, that's the way that session went. I mean, it was like, wow. I've never in my life seen anything like it. I mean, he, write that down, write that down, write that down. And it was like, that's the way the session went. But you still get 50% because it's your song idea. And I was like, I'm not, anyway, but just, I don't know, I don't even know where I was, but sitting down with this guy, and he said, so play me something you've written. And I kind of felt in a way kind of like.
Skip this is?
No, this other guy from New York.
Oh, Gary
Portnoy is his name. And he says, you know, play me something you've written. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'm a songwriter on a song, but I didn't really write any of the lyrics. I had the song idea. So it always kind of felt kind of fraudulent to me to say that I wrote a song that I actually didn't write. I said, all right, I played him this song, Put Your Hand in Mine, and he's like, he's kind of looked at me. I said, well, you play me something you've written. Dun, da, 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 dun, dun, where everybody knows your name. Oh, my gosh. Wow. He played the theme song to Cheers. I was like, well, I guess we're not writing anything today.
There's a great story about Mike Reed writing with a young girl. And correct me if I get it wrong, but where she showed up late. He's sitting there, the great Mike Reed, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Can Make You Love Me If You Don't, and a myriad of other amazing songs. Mm-hmm. And she shows up late, doesn't even really acknowledge it, starts rooting through her purse. And she says, so what have you written? And he starts rattling off. I was a songwriter of the decade. And I was the songwriter of the year last year. And I had this number one and that number one. He goes, what have you written? This is a new artist, has nothing, you know. It's just there's a weird culture in town where it's like, you know, it's very business-like, even though it's such a personal interaction when you're writing a song with someone. And sometimes people lose maybe their humanity in it, you know, where they just see it as digging a ditch that day. Mm-hmm. I was never able to really get into that. Mm-hmm. When I moved to town, Keith Urban just had that first big hit, Days Gone By. Mm-hmm. And then Rascal Flatts started making records. And I'm like, oh, this stuff feels like everything from the 70s, like Bread and the Eagles, all these great records, Ambrosia. And I was like, I'm going to move down there. I came down right sort of at the right time. And I kind of wrote me and my buddy Dave was writing essentially nonstop together and producing these tracks. And this is going to flow into our next topic, which is how we met, which was Cole Wright, who was Dave's publisher at the time. I was signed to Mark Bright and Kelly King at My Good Girl, which was a Sony writing publishing company. And I had a little studio in the RCA building, this famous building. I had Chet Atkins' old studio,
and Elvis recorded down here. Because you had that office.
So Elvis did most of his recordings in the B room, which was outside in the parking lot. He did some of the big orchestral stuff in the big A room that at that time Ben Folds had, but now Dave Cobb has. And I had this little room that was essentially 2 tour buses kind of side by side, right? It was very small.
Smaller than that, man.
It was small.
Yeah.
And it had a control room.
Small as the trailer I lived in.
It had a control room.
Seriously.
It had what looked like a little tracking room. We kind of set it up like a living room, and 2 little ISO booths that were like phone booths.
Camper refrigerator.
A little camper refrigerator and a hot plate, that sort of deal. Yep. And we had gotten the note that we were going to be able to write with Jimmy Wayne, which for me was huge at that point because I wasn't at the point where they would let me write with big artists, you know, or certainly if you did get an opportunity, it was like what we got. Your record was finished, and you might get a co-write after the record's done, and God knows how far off the next record is, and you're just at the beginning of a new pile of songs.
Well, that story that I shared with you about writing that song with Skip sort of plays a role in how we ended up recording Do You Believe Me Now, because, you know, it was about 4:30 on a Friday or whatever in Nashville. And as I said earlier, you have a window of time to get on the freeway or the interstate. If it's 4:30, I can make it home in about 35 minutes. But if I wait till 4:45, I'll be sitting there 2 hours. I mean, it's just, so I wanted to leave, but then I had all my bags, and it was the first time we met, Joe, and Dave.
And we hadn't gotten any.
We didn't even write we didn't even write our name down, because you don't write good with everybody. And, you know, somebody as talented as Joe and Dave, you know, sometimes the chemistry is nuclear, sometimes it's not. You just sit and look at them and you're like.
It doesn't mean there won't be next time either.
No, we just didn't write anything that day.
That's a really important point that I've had this discussion with people, is chemistry. I notice with like a lot of managers, they feel like they can put the artist with anybody and it'll click. If you have chemistry with somebody, it should be protected at all costs. And I don't think a lot of people understand that.
No, and then, you know, I've written songs with writers who, you know, most people couldn't write anything with them, and they're like, man, they're the hardest writer to write with. And I'm like, man, we clicked.
Yeah.
And it was like, we had a freaking big hit song. Anyway, it was.
And I remember when you were leaving, I was tentative.
Well, you were sitting at the soundboard.
Yeah.
Is that what you call it? Control board?
Yeah, the
console. And then I'll never forget it, man. You said, hey, will you listen to a song we wrote? And in my mind, I'm thinking, gosh, I'm gonna miss that window of time to get on the freaking interstate and get home, you know. But then I thought about when I asked Skip if he would listen to my idea, and if, you know, I said, all right, man. So I put my bag down, my guitar down, and I just said, okay. And then Joe said, and I heard, do you remember? And it was na 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 na, whatever he played. Was it a demo? It was a demo.
Okay.
It was a demo.
Dave was singing, and at first I thought, all right, man. When that chorus came in, I was like, holy crap, man! I just knew it, because I'd been in town long enough to know a few things. I just knew when I heard a song, I just knew it. I said, that is a hit song. And I also knew how to be quiet. Somewhat. I knew not to blow it up and make a big deal out of it, because I knew that Joe and Dave were relatively new to town, and I felt like, man, if I blow this thing up and make them believe that this thing is an enormous hit, they're gonna freaking run all over the place with it, you know, and everybody's gonna know about it. So I didn't say. I said, yes, I remember getting in the car thinking, holy crap, that song is a hit, man. They can't play it for anybody else. And I was driving home. I was sitting in traffic thinking, like,
did you and Dave know it was a hit?
No.
I think when you're writing that many songs, you think like, well, there's a reason I played you that song.
That's exactly. There is, yeah.
So it's
right
like
there.
I knew that it felt good.
God.
And I thought that he was one of the few vocalists that could do it, because it had a big range. It was a big song. Not a lot of guy vocalists can hit, you know, more than a fifth or sixth, you know, an interval. They don't like to sing outside of that.
But we did. We'll get to that in a minute, because it's a very important point you're making. However, on the way home that day, I was thinking, that song is a hit. And I've been sitting here for 3 years on the shelf at the record label.
But you had a record ready to go out.
Well, no.
And a single chosen.
Well, the thing about it is backing up, when I was at Universal was signed to Universal because Universal had purchased DreamWorks. So everybody on DreamWorks went to Universal. Scott Borchetta was at Universal, and he got fired. And he had to basically start a record label or, go doff cloth or whatever at Far Yarns. And he wasn't going to do that. he said, can you come over here and, let's do this together. So being the friend that I was, because I'm that kind of friend, a very loyal friend, I asked out of my record deal with Universal to go help him start.
Was that record on Universal that was coming out?
No.
It was on Big Machine.
To help him start Big Machine. And we went in the studio and recorded 4 songs. And they really weren't, with all due respect to Mark Bright, they were a Mark Bright production. They were they just weren't great. They weren't great recordings. I thought the recordings were sterile. They were played well, but you hear them and you're just like, God, there's just nothing that makes you feel like that's a hit. You just didn't feel it. And I felt like it's one of the songs was a friend of a friend who wrote it, and I was like, even the lyrics are horrible. And I was so disappointed, but they were going to go out because Borchetta needed to get a song out because we were like, it was just me. Long story short, when I heard Do You Believe Me Now, I was like, God, that's it. But sonically, it was so much different than these songs. It really, truly was like on a level of like Nashville hadn't even heard yet. And I knew that. I knew it. I knew they were still doing the starch gene kind of growing out of that, and they were kind of in that place where, Gretchen Wilson had Redneck Woman, but Faith Hill was still trying to hold on to the reins. Well, one rein, and then Shania Twain had the other rein, and they were battling, and then Gretchen came in, and I was here, and then over here was Rascal Flatts, and then over here was Keith Urban. It was just all over the place. And then some cowboy hat guy would come in, and it was just to me was like, I don't hear anything on the radio that makes me feel like, God, that sounds good. Not that I'm knocking anybody's art, because I believe arts should be respected, all of it. But I just didn't hear anything that made me feel good, that ignited that chemical in your brain that makes you say, wow, man, this is amazing. And when I heard that song, Do You Believe Me Now, I thought, that's it. That's that song. That's the hot knife through the butter. That is so good.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think on the way home, you drove home and you called and said, I'd like to put my voice on that track.
Yeah. So, I need to speed up here, but I was so excited, and because I had been, I had recorded songs before, even when I was recording with some producers in town, I would record a song that I would go find and bring that to the table. And sometimes even had recorded that song that they would then lift that song off my project and give it to another artist they were working with. And I was like, I can't trust my own producers because they're taking my own songs that I'm finding. I'm out doing all the work.
I was going to ask you, were you finding the songs or were they choosing the songs for you?
Both. So I would find a great song, and then I'd bring it to the table, and they'd say, oh, that's great. Let's put it on hold. Well, I'd hold it thinking, when we go in the studio, we're going to record this song. Well, next thing you know, I'd hear another artist they were working with, he cut that song on.
And meanwhile, you're paying $10,000 to cut it.
$20,000.
And it's going back on recoupment. You're paying for
and
it,
I'm
not
paying
able
for
to
it.
use
And
it.
I'd hear that song on the radio. And it was just, the battle was just over the top. So I knew when I heard that song, I was like, I'm not telling anybody.
Well, what I didn't tell you, and you might know this now, but was that it was in the wrong key for you.
Well, I'm getting there. It's taking me I know I'm talking about.
I didn't want to talk myself out of the cut. So I was just like, I'm not going to tell him. I'm just going to re-record the whole thing.
We're both kind of doing each other like this.
Well,
like,
I didn't want to lose
I ain't going
it.
to tell that sucker nothing, man. He's going to go play that thing for
was the
somebody
biggest
else.
thing
And
that
he's
I-
telling me it's cut too high, and I ain't going to tell that sucker it's cut too high.
I went in and stayed the next 3-4 days and recut the whole thing.
It was amazing because I thought, in my mind, I'm thinking, is he going to be able to record that song, re-record it to make it sound like that? Shoot, man. I said, Joe, hey, man, I love that song. I'd like to come in and I was trying to not to build it up. I was like, I'd like to come in and put my vocal on that track, but track's too high because Dave sings like way up here, and I'm like, I'm really not that high of a singer. Can we cut it in this key, whatever it was? And then he's like, give me a couple of days. Gosh, man, I went in and you played that track. I couldn't believe it. I was like, this guy's amazing. And I was like, I remember sitting there saying, you know, I've had enough experience with radio that they like to talk even more than me. They want to have at least 11 seconds on the front end of a song to say, and coming up next here on da-da-da-da-da, we have a new song by da-da-da-da-da-da, do you remember? They want to get right on it. And that's the game. That's the whole thing. You know, so we need to put an intro on this thing. And
yeah, it started with the vocal.
It started with a, do you remember? Yeah. And I was like, that's not going to work.
That's how it was originally?
Yeah.
Right off the
top. No music. It was, do you, and then the band came in.
Yeah. So we talked about it, and we experimented.
That's not how I recall. I remember you being on my couch behind me.
Oh, I do. Yeah, I remember that. Sitting there.
And
I said,
was
it needs
like,
an intro, like something like this.
His great hammer on.
And you said, play that again. And you turn around with a 58.
Yeah, that's a 58.
Yep, and you said, do that again.
I was the mic stand.
Sucker was good, wasn't he? He said, I said, do it again.
And that's what's on the record.
Yep.
Is you on my couch.
And I said, and anyway, and next thing you know, he put it in the mix, and he did his magic, and it was like,
well, and let's give credit where credit is due. People ask me about that song, and it was perfect because Dave and I were doing something that wasn't really Nashville.
It was definitely
it's just
not,
different.
It's definitely not. Nobody was.
It's
doing
not
that
so
now.
different from today.
Yeah.
You know, it's very similar to today, but it was in 2007. But the only way that song made it, I think, on radio was the lyric was so easily accessible. It was such a country lyric that Tim Johnson wrote for that song. Dave and I didn't write any of those lyrics other than the the beginning of verse 1. She wants you to throw a rock. Okay. Hey, we don't throw the rock inside, love. Go sit down.
So he,
but I'm sorry. Let me finish. So Tim Johnson wrote this lyric, and then on top of that, your voice on that almost felt like it was a Philadelphia Blue-Eyed Soul thing, and it was this combination of that acoustic guitar intro, your voice, and the a little bit off center track in this lyric that was easy enough for those guys to say, "Hey, this is different, but it feels kind of normal."
Well, I remember when we finally finished the recording of that song, we didn't have the back end, that high part and the
the donut hole.
And I lived with that track for about we ended up putting that on there, but I lived with that track for a month and 2 weeks, so it was like 6 weeks. Because
I felt like 10 years to me.
Yeah, because I had been sitting on the
shelf. I kept
shelf.
wondering, why isn't he playing it for the label?
Yeah.
I just assumed it wasn't happening.
Well, no. I knew that if I walked into that record label with that song, it would have either ignited them or it would have given them a reason to drop me and feel good about themselves. Because they had put me on the shelf. You know, after I'd asked out of my deal to come over and help launch the label, shortly after I did that, they signed Taylor Swift. Well, you know, they follow the money. I mean, she had the mom and dad and the whole thing, man. It just changed the climate. And I was kind of like the guy that was like, who are you? And it was, for 3 years, I sat there and kind of like wondered, when is this guy going to come back and help his friend? I mean, that's what I thought he was going to do. And it was just a waiting game, and I thought I know I'm going to get dropped because they're not going to keep me around for 3 years, and I mean it's going to happen eventually. They're going to drop me, and if I take this song in there and they don't like it, it's going to be a reason for them to say, "Yeah, we decided not to keep you." I mean,
that's funny to see it from that side because, from my eyes, it was a whole different. I just thought it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Yet another thing you thought was going to maybe happen, a near miss, and it was like, but I didn't understand why you weren't going.
And I didn't say anything to you or Dave because I simply didn't want y'all to run away with it.
Yeah.
Well, the darn publisher heard it. Your publisher. God, that made me mad, man. I remember I had played it for a friend of mine. It was her and her mom and her dad. They said, hey, you know, we're in town. We'll take you to dinner or whatever. Anyway, they said, what are you working on? I said, well, I just recorded this song, but you can't tell anybody. I'll play it for you. Tell me what you think about it. So I played them, Do You Believe Me Now? And they were just like, wow, you know, just like going on and on about it. Well, that girl, I mean, talking about luck. I mean, this kind of luck just doesn't happen every day, man. She texted me. She says, hey, is the name of that song that you played for us the other night something about Believe Me Now? And I said, yeah. I said, it's called Do You Believe Me Now? What's up? She says, there's a publisher in my boss's office playing that song to him right now, pitching it to him.
I got texts. My phone was, I'm going to go right, and it's like, bing, bing,
I was hot, man. I was like, Joe, I told y'all not to play it for anybody.
And I'm like, what? I'm in the studio.
Well, I said, are you sure? I said, go to the door and listen. And she did, and she said, yeah, it's your voice. And I was like, give me your boss's number right now, the cell phone. Man, I called him.
In the meeting.
And I said, hey, I just didn't know who he was. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, we'll call him Joe Schmo. Schmo, hey, this is Jimmy Wayne, man. He said, hey, I could tell it was awkward. He's like, hey, Jimmy Wayne. Like he was telling somebody across the table who I was. And I could hear a kind of a little, you know, mumble. And I was like, hey, can you tell the lady that's playing you that recording of Do You Believe Me Now that is actually a recording that we've already mixed? We'd mixed it. And I said, I think it's mastered or something like that. I said, to stop pitching. I'm not going to say her name. Stop pitching that song. I'm putting it out on the radio. It's like, stop it. And it shut the meeting down. I said, y'all, blah, blah, blah. And I said a few other things. I don't know. I said, you tell her to stop playing my song. But the chances of that happening, because this producer
was awkward.
Could have, had he not gotten that phone call from me, he could have put that thing on hold and recorded it on a big artist in town.
And if another artist, then you have the publishers take control. They own the administration of those copyrights.
Gone.
And then it's like, well, it's not happening.
Jimmy's been on the shelf for 3 years. He ain't going to do anything. We could put this on a guy who's having hits right now. Bang. Right. It was just like, wow. So I called Scott, and I was like, Scott, such and such is playing Do You Believe Me Now all over town. He said, stand by. So he calls and pretty much ends that. And we put it out on the radio, and he just moved the camera. He keeps moving the camera. He keeps moving the camera. Max, she keeps moving. Anyway, so we put it on the radio, and it's going to fall.
Is his camera still good?
Yeah. Hey, buddy, you need to chill.
Vaughn.
Come here. So we put it on the radio, and then I'd still hang out with Joe and Dave, and I'd go over there, and they'd be in that little studio drinking black coffee and eating peanut butter sandwiches and struggling, just trying to make a payment on the rent. And I actually have a video of that lady, Michael, coming in your studio trying to collect rent money. And you're like, I'm going to pay you. I mean, that's how they were. They were just struggling. He's like, I'm going to pay you. I promise you I'm going to pay you the end of this week or something like that. And she said, okay, the end of this week. And she walks out. I have a video of you.
That's amazing.
It was rough, man. So I said, sign the refrigerator every week wherever it's charting. And then it was like, coming up next on is song Do You Believe Me Now at number 20, at number 17, at number. And so every week it was like we'd write it down. And we'd be in the parking lot throwing football, and Dave and Joe would say, I hadn't heard it yet. I was like, you'll hear it. I hadn't heard it yet. I said, you'll hear it. These are the times. Make memories, because this is, I
remember that.
Golly, I remember that, man.
I heard it when it went number 8, and I was getting my hair cut at the Supercuts. It's a really high-end salon, Cool Springs. And and the girl who was cutting my hair said, hey, what do you do? And I'd been waiting for someone to ask me that. It's the first song on the radio, like desperately waiting for someone to ask me that. And I had it chambered, ready to go. And I said, I'm a songwriter. I said, do you listen to country music? She goes, all the time. It's on the overheads. And I said, do you believe me now? It's number 8 song in the country. She goes, no. So that was my big, but there was, right after that, my wife and I left Carrabba's, went to the car, turned on the car, and the end chorus was on. It was the first time I heard it on the radio. And then we hit the scan button, and it was on another station at the same time.
Wow.
From there on, it was the second biggest song of 2008. After all that said and done, it was...
Boom! Wow, look at that, man.
Look at those eyes.
Look at them lipstick. Look at that freshly shaved faced.
So after 50-some weeks going up, something like that, right? Number 1 for 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And it was, man, I want to thank you for that. That was the one thing, I'd had other successes doing things in the music business, but that was the one that kind of was why I was in the music business. I was doing all this stuff to make money. Mm-hmm. And to have that, it was like such vindication, doing all this stuff that you do. And it's like, you kind of feel like, man, am I doing the right thing by my family, and am I wasting my time? And that was the first time that was like, man, this is like, I'm really in it now.
You are, man. I had a one thing that I knew from a kid is how to work. I just starting from the beginning of our conversation, it was just having a work ethic. I knew how to work, and I knew how to promote, and I would just, I would say, yeah, he cuts your grass, but I'll trim your weed. I mean, I was good at selling my job, man. I could just go and say, I can do it better than that guy. And they'd be like, all right. And then I always would, because I would just do extra stuff. And and so when I met Joe and Dave, everywhere I went in town, they'd be like, hey, Jimmy, how you doing, man? I was like, I'm good, man. Hey, do you know Joe and Dave? And they'd be like, who? I was like, Joe and Dave. No? I was like, you will. And that's what I started. That was kind of like what I started doing. Everywhere I went, I'd say, you know Joe and Dave? And they'd be like, nope. I was like, you will.
That was another thing that was cool, was like so many times behind the scenes, the songwriters, like you didn't know, that skip you and getting write those songs, and record producers and engineers and players. No one knows anything about them because they're out of sight, out of mind. And it was like you were always, even on the radio and on television, anytime you were talking about that song, you were talking about me, which was like, no one had ever done that either. And since no one has done it, So I thought that was really cool too. I think that says a lot about the person too. It's like, some people want to turn down the noise. So when Tim McGraw releases a single, it says, Right Back at You by Tim McGraw. And that's all people get. Mm-hmm. And so for them to step out and say, hey, it's kind of like, I don't know if they do it intentionally, but it misrepresents the actual intellectual property or something like that. And we're fine with it. We do it behind the scenes. You get paid. But it was really cool that you did that, and you always did that nonstop. Every time I was around, you were going out of your way to point the spotlight off of you onto me, which I thought was really it's a sign of character. Those kinds of people that do that, especially when your business relies on you maintaining the spotlight.
Well, it was fun doing that on the road, because especially like in Pennsylvania. So I'd go to Pennsylvania, and for some reason, there's a lot of fans in Pennsylvania. I don't know what it is about Pennsylvania and me, but there's this chemistry. It's unlike even my own hometown. It's strange. I mean, there's so many fans in Pennsylvania. And so being on the radio in Pennsylvania, any of those radio stations, I'd be like, yeah, man, this two guys from Pennsylvania. I know you say you live in New York, but were you born?
I grew up in Pittsburgh for the first 25 years.
Okay. So I'd say, these guys are Pennsylvania guys. And they'd be like, really? And that would just be, it would amp that interview up to another level. Like, they just couldn't believe, wow, man, tell us about, and I'd be like, yeah, man, these guys are just, Joe's got this thing he does in studio. It's like no other producer in town. And they're like, really, man? I was like, yeah, he's got this thing he does. It makes these drums sound like cannons going off. And it's like, I just enjoyed doing that, man. It was like just seeing them.
That's cool, because that's a rare thing in the music business. It's all about the commodity is the spotlight.
Well, then other producers in town started getting in on our sauce, and I was like, you need to keep them away from here because they're not going to be good for you. They're good producers, they're good, but they're business, and you need to keep them out of the kitchen because if they're going to get in there and learn your recipe, and they're going to try to change your recipe, you put too much garlic in this, you put too. I was like, that they're not helping you. They want to mess with your sauce to put you out of business, and that's exactly what they were trying to do. To this very day, I believe that, and will believe that till I leave. That's exactly what these guys do. They don't want to help you become a better producer. You were kicking their butts because that production was just like no other production in town, period. There was no other producer making drums sound like that.
I remember hearing that, I believe from you or from the label, that they had spent $750,000 on radio promotion for that one single.
Wow, I didn't know that.
$750,000.
Huh.
You recouped it. So thank you.
I was in the black.
It was a fun fact that the week I moved to Nashville was the week you guys hit #1.
The week before,
I met Jimmy at your studio at RCA, and it had just hit #1.
I remember that.
Oh wow.
Yep, I remember meeting you.
Yeah.
Yep.
I remember you coming to my studio and finding a hot dog in the microwave that was petrified. He put it out and was banging it against the plate. He's like, "What is this?" It's like, "Oh, we forgot that in there last night." Evidently, it changes the carbon footprint of a hot dog.
I remember Jimmy giving me a lesson on how Nashville worked because I had no idea. I had moved from New York City, but it was about you were telling the tale of how you, in those 3 years that you were kind of shelved. I think you had even described a time where you didn't have a deal. You had lost your deal, if I remember correctly. You lost your deal, and no one would write with you. All the people that you had written with a million times, you lost your deal, and all of a sudden, they couldn't be found.
Well, that's.
I was like, wow, okay, this sounds a little more hardcore than I thought it was.
Most people from the outside think that Nashville is like cows and hay, cowboy hats, jeans, and a bunch of dummies. But it's a melting pot.
It's competitive.
Of all over the world. These guys are here, and they're sharks. I mean, it's just the way it is. And the thing about it is just like Harlan Howard said, when you start complaining about the business, like there was this kid sitting at the bar at Longhorn on Lyle Avenue complaining about the business, and the famous line that Harlan Howard said, who is a hit songwriter, old school guy.
Yeah, huge.
He just sit there and he drinks his beer and he says, "Nobody sent for you." And that's just the way it is. It's
Didn't
like,
you have a line when people would ask you about Nashville? You'd say, "Stay away." What was it? Don't come.
It's just something, I don't know.
What's that?
There's just no telling. Oh,
It's like, yeah,
God.
don't come. We're all full. Thank you.
I don't know. I remember one time that guy says, "Man, I heard that song on the radio, man. I'm sorry I didn't call you back," or something like that. And I said, "Yeah, the turtle didn't always win the race." He was a producer trying to get on board at the last minute. And I said, "No, turtle doesn't always win the race."
I was in the front seat of Jimmy's SUV.
Oh, God, that's funny.
We're pulling down the alley in the middle, 16th and 17th. We're behind Big Loud Shirt. And up pulls this noted famous songwriter.
Very famous.
And they say, "Hey, I hear you have a new single coming out." And this songwriter was famous for stealing songs from people, titles,
even when they're
rewriting them.
I mean, even when they're released.
Yeah.
God, notorious.
And they roll down their window and they say, "Hey, what's your song called?" And literally without a millisecond, I'm in the passenger seat. He said, "Better Yet." And then we pulled away and he said, "That bitch is going to write Better Yet right now." And I was just like, I didn't even know what was going on. I was
Exactly.
still, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed
Oh, my God.
from out of town. But he's like, you got to watch, it's great. Nashville's a great community. But at the end of the day, you got to make sure that you keep your eyes on your stuff.
Well,
People will take
it's
it
a
when you get up
business.
from your seat.
It's a business, and when I was 16 years old, I worked in a machine shop sweeping floors, and I mean that's how I helped my mom pay rent at the trailer park. We struggled really hard, so I made $5 an hour sweeping floors and doing odd jobs, and this machinist who would always tell me, I mean we never had visitors, but he'd always tell me, make sure the blueprints are turned upside down. and I'd be like, because you'd see like a blueprint open, and it would just all these numbers and stuff. It was just stuff I didn't understand it, but that was his blueprints. And if you see one of those blueprints up, face up, you make sure to flip it upside down. And he said, because you just don't want anyone walking in here and snapping a picture of that. And he just beat that in my head. And so when I got to Nashville, I was like, I'd see people leave their notepads laying on the table, and they'd go to lunch, and I'm like, that is crazy. Y'all trust each other like that. And they're like, oh, nobody's going to do anything. Well, then I thought, okay. Then I left my stuff out. Next thing I know, I heard my song idea on the radio. And I'm like, there's no way you came up with that idea. I mean, because it's so unique. We write at the same company, on the same hallway, side by side. You came up with the same song idea I have. There's just no
We have
way.
a friend that finally had gotten the opportunity to write with one of these massive 20-plus #1 songwriters. And you know this story, I think. And he came in with a bunch of ideas, as you would with a big songwriter like that. And he had been writing and paying his dues for years. And he said, he gave him this title, and the guy looks at him and he goes, He turns his notebook. You know this story?
I don't think so.
He turns his notebook like 6 pages, writes it down. He goes, that's not good for today. And he just went back and they wrote something else. And the unassuming, the younger songwriter was just like, what just happened?
Just got raped.
Like, why did he write it down? But that's just, can't copyright a title.
Yeah.
Evidently.
Yeah. And it's a business. I get it. And
you got to do it honorably, though.
You got to protect yourself. And when I went through that time where I was off the radio, off the radar, my phone literally stopped ringing, and it used to ring all day long. I mean, I just couldn't tell you how many calls I'd get a day, but it just stopped. And then what I learned from that experience is you don't go back and be mean to those people, because there was you just kind of just say, okay, I understand who you are and what you want. And I remember people who called me when my mom passed, like this guy called me every day. A couple other songwriters still stayed in touch, but I literally can count the people who have called me in the last 10 years on one hand.
Wow.
In 10 years. But they don't know what I'm doing because I don't talk. I learned to not share my business with anyone in town, because
I'm going to share your business. So, I tell everyone that Jimmy Wayne is secretly the richest
You've told me that.
entrepreneur in town.
That's not true.
I went into his house, and he took me, for one reason or another, I think he was showing me his original Honda Civic in his garage.
Oh, yeah.
That he came to town, and he kept it. He's sentimental like that. He keeps things like cars and phone recordings. Yeah. I looked into his garage, and there's stacked up like a bunch of cases of water, like 9-volt batteries. And I'm like, what is the deal with it? Looked like a Costco in there. And he's like, oh, those are all my tour rider. And rather than throw them out, I put that underneath the bus. And I'm like, that's a guy that won't be hungry. Or at least he won't be hungry and regretting that he had wasted or squandered something. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I know you're doing your speaking. He's a big motivational speaker and keynote speaker, and the book, and still doing music. And he's got some stuff that he can't talk about that's really big coming up. But it's like, secretly, he's been this guy people chase in this town, like to a flaw, chase this fame that you don't get paid for. But you've been able to keep the art up front and keep on focusing in on that art and making sure that you're continually doing that thing that creatively drives you and doing things with purpose and with outlet. And because they're great, they all find their way eventually. It's the ultimate speculative field. You've been able to do that, where some people are just like, I can't tell you the time that a new artist on Warner Brothers has come into a co-write with me and said, I want an anthem. What do you want to write today? I want something everybody can raise their beer glass to. It's like they're chasing that same tired song.
Well,
and nothing against those songs, but it's like it shows zero artistic integrity. Like, you've got to have something to say. The people that break through and have these long careers, people buy into those people. They don't buy into the song that lasts 3.5 minutes for a summer.
It's the work ethic. I believe that all of my success is contributed to my work ethic and knowing how to work. Like, it's like, do you work? Well, I can work, but do you know how to work? And you know how to turn that work and be smart enough to I'm not trying to be famous. So I'm willing to do, like, I'll go the long road to get there. And you can go the short road and get there, but you'll be gone by the time I get there.
Right.
That's okay.
You've come and gone if you came at all.
Absolutely.
Hey, so what would you, for an artist that wants to be moving to Nashville, what would you tell them?
I would say your chain is as strong as your weakest link. And what I mean by that, let's look at this is my guitar playing hand, so I got these long fingernails. Let's look at the number 10. And I'm like, who is a number 10 in the music business? Who is that person? To me, that would be somebody like Bruce Springsteen. I mean, he's like a number 10, man. Or, Michael Jackson, or somebody that's that level of Prince. Just like, wow. I mean, really. But in the country music business, we have a lot of number twos, no pun intended. We have a lot of number twos. And we have a lot of number twos who are number 2, but they might be a number 6 in something, in guitar playing. So their guitar playing is number 6. Their singing is number 2. Their songwriting is number 1.5. Their image is a number 4. What else? Their work ethic is a number 3. So everything's around here. But their guitar playing is a number 6. So their weakest link was the 1.5. So they look like a 1.5. It doesn't matter how good you play guitar. You have to get everything up to a number 6. It has to look even. That way you look like a number 10. Because they can't poke holes in you. So if they can't poke holes in you and say, man, he's a good guitar player, but man, his image is just like, you look like if your image is a number 2 and everything is a number 6, you're going to look like a number 2. So you got to get everything up to a number 6 where it looks like you can't poke holes in it, and you look like a 10. You look like a Prince.
What can people expect when they come to town? Like, what does that look like timeline-wise?
Just they used to call it a 10-year town, but I got a record deal in 3 years when I moved from the time I moved to Nashville. I got record deal on DreamWorks in 3 years. And that's not because I was better than anybody else. It's because I just worked hard. And I didn't go out. I didn't run out all over town playing my songs for everybody, trying to showcase. I didn't do those big showcases, because once you do those one-time showcases in front of all the producers and all the people who make decisions, and they say no, that's it. I mean, chances of you getting another shot is going to be very slim. So I stayed out of everybody's ears, everybody's eyes, and I set up like it's kind of like I kind of looked at it like a military strategy. You go in and you observe, you plan, and then you execute your attack. But
So how did you go about getting your stuff heard if you were not showcasing?
I didn't. I came into town knowing that I was not here to sell songs. I was here to get a record deal and to write songs for myself, and I put those, kind of like under the mattress. And I said, I'm just going to stockpile all my waters and batteries, and I'm going to build this thing. And then when I go out to do this, it's got to count. And I did. That's what I did. I went out with just me and my guitar, and I played Sarah Smile, which is a song I didn't even write, but I just made it mine. I made it a number 6. I made it everything around that was everything about me was that song. I made everything about that song. It just the way I played, the way I looked, everything about it was. I didn't wear a cowboy hat playing Sarah Smile. I mean, I looked like the song.
Would you do anything different looking back?
No.
You feel good about it?
I couldn't, because everything was just such small increments. If I took one of those out, that my life would just be different. Everything counted. Everything counts. Just the fact that if I hadn't have called co-write back. I'd never met you. Just everything.
Yeah, I always tell people, wouldn't it be fun to go back and the people that you end up being really great friends with, to have that knowledge at your first meeting, like subconsciously to know, like, this guy's going to be a guy that I hang out with in a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Really good friends.
Mm.
Well, I want to thank you for being on.
Thank you.
You have so many great stories, and they're all in your book. I had probably heard all of your stories out of sequence at one time or another, but then I read that book, and I don't read. I'm not a good reader. So I would read that book at my son's Taekwondo classes, and I would cry in the corner at my son's Taekwondo classes. I sat, for one reason or another, I was all alone in the corner, and no one would come close to me, the crying man at the Taekwondo class. And I'd have my son read it to me on the way home. And once I heard all those stories actually lined up, it was so much more powerful. An incredible life story. So if you don't have it already, you should read Walk to Beautiful, which is his New York Times bestseller. And go check out Jimmy Wayne on Spotify. And where can they find you?
JimmyWayne.com.
JimmyWayne.com. He's a keynote speaker. I see a lot of videos of people's responses to seeing you speak live, and you could tell they're incredibly moved. Like, or overwhelmed. You can't coach that into somebody on video. They're letting out everything that they just saw. So
we capture them coming right out of the room.
He's an incredible performer. Do you perform? At your okay.
Yeah.
So once again, he's a Renaissance man. I'm proud to call him a friend. I can't imagine my life without him. I appreciate you, brother.
You too,
Jimmy Wayne. I'm Joe West. You can reach me at joe-west.com, apprenticeacademy.net. That's the school. And Mike Shimshack?
Yeah, Mike Shimshack on Instagram at Shaq Jones, SHACKJONZ.
Your socials.
I know my socials suck, man, but sorry.
Keeping it lean.
I kind of like people not being able to get a hold of me. But thank you, Jimmy. I mean, this is a super inspiring guy. One of the most inspiring guys I know, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really, really, really cool.
And
we just hit the tip of the iceberg on him too.
We'll have you back if you're willing.
Let's do it. There's some stuff coming up that we can talk about after it's released.
I'd like to hear some of those stories that you will then call me afterwards and ask to edit out of the podcast. There's a couple bus stories. Look at his face immediately. All right. Well, anyhow, I'm not trying to get you in any trouble.
I know all I can say is I know that I'm thinking ahead, like, this is going to come out when that comes out, and that I just got to be careful.
All right. So, and for Vaughn Head.
Thanks, Vaughn.
Thank you, buddy. Our engineer and producer. This is signing off from the West Barn.